Hello to our friends joining us via recording. Today is January 20th, and we are covering the first lab lesson, which is an introduction to anatomy. We are going to focus our time today on some of the topics that you see biggest on our word map over here. So we're going to work on identifying organs and the systems they're in. We're going to talk a lot about those directional terms and how we use them. To help us out with the organs, we are going to start in visible body. So let me get my visible body window open for you. And I will flip to the view that you all see when you're in that program. In the chat, give me a thumbs up or an emoji or a quick note. How many of you have already logged into visible body? How many of us have gone in there? Okay, several of us. Awesome, getting lots of things. Perfect. So if you have not already gone into visible body, you can access that through our lab resources area. So make sure that you pop into visible body. Remember that we are starting a 2-week free trial. I am talking with the bookstore right now about getting those codes sent to you. So you will have a code by the time your free trial runs out. So don't worry, you will not get charged for this. You won't have to pay for this. The university is taking care of it for you. All right, let's go into, did we look at this at all yesterday? I feel like we probably didn't, right? I didn't pull up visible body. Okay, perfect. So this is going to be our crash course, everything visible body. So let me just show you visible body. I really like that it's super easy to navigate. My first folder up here, in case you didn't already get this stuff from Blackboard, it's the exact same lab syllabus, the exact same lab calendar, the exact same worksheets that you see right here. Somebody asked me to enlarge. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger. Oops, that's too big. Is that a little bit better, Vanessa? And this is the exact same thing you see in your visible body as well. So my general folder, all that normal stuff. Remember that the lab manual has all of the worksheets that we're going to complete the entire semester. If you want to print them all at once, print the lab manual. If you want to print them every week, do it that way too. Right now we're here in week 1. So let's look at week 1. You see here in visible body a couple of things that have this little check mark box next to them. These are the graded assignments. So with visible body, our assignments are always due on Friday. Make sure to keep that in the back of your mind. Every Friday, by the end of the day Friday, make sure you've done the week's visible body assignments. We have 2 assignments this week, one for identifying bones and one for identifying organs. So make sure to get both of these completed by Friday night. These are just like the lecture homework assignments, where you can complete them as many times as you want to get the highest score. So we'll keep your highest score, do it 5 times, do it once, I don't care. Just make sure it's done by Friday. Before you do these assignments, I highly recommend that you go to the area that says Start Here in each week. So I'm going to click on this. Start Here gives you an opportunity to practice what you're going to be doing on the homework assignments. So I clicked on it. Notice down below there are several different views here of the human body, and we'll pull these up together to look at them. But these views that we see right here are the same kinds of things you're going to see when you open up that assignment. So to help you practice finding organs or help you practice finding bones, you're going to want to work your way through each of these practice assignments. Notice up here in our description, it tells you how to use these practice assignments. So I'll show you in a moment when we pull up visible body. There's a part in visible body that says anatomy search. What you can do is type in the name of a bone or type in the name of an organ that you're looking for, and visible body will show you where that is. Now, if it's something that's hiding underneath something else, so we'll start with the heart, for example. When I pull up this view down here for the heart and the lungs. Visible body will highlight where the heart is, but the heart is hiding underneath the sternum, and it's hiding underneath some of the muscles in here. It's possible that I can't see what visible body is trying to show me. I might have to use something called dissect to move it away. So I'll show you how to move some things away. We want to make sure we have a general idea of where something's found, what we're looking for, in case we have to do a little dissecting. But then that anatomy search function is going to be really helpful to show us what we're looking for. So let's start with the heart and the lungs here. We'll start with this view. Now, somebody mentioned it in the chat. Sometimes visible body will take a long time to load. That is totally normal. It's because it is a big 3D visualization program. So don't be surprised if it takes a while. The other thing I'll mention for you, if you have space on your phone or on your tablet or on your iPad, you actually have the ability to download study apps that come with visible body. So they have, I think they call it Visible Body Atlas, for example, or Visible Body Muscle Premium. These are apps that you can download and have forever. So yeah, this thing, Human Anatomy Atlas, that it's mentioning right here, you can download this on your phone and take it with you and study it wherever. Fun fact, my chiropractor actually has this app, and he uses it to show his patients what he's working on. So it is out in the world, but it's a study tool that you can use outside of our class long after you leave us. Obviously, we can see it's running really slow. I apologize. Almost there. Okay, well, it was supposed to pop. There we go. Okay. So if we give it enough time, we wait for it, we're now seeing essentially a body on the table. If we were in a cadaver lab together, this is what it might look like. So I am, for example, I'm trying to figure out where is this organ called the heart. So I'm looking at my cadaver. I am using a mouse. You can do this on a touch screen. By using a touchscreen to zoom in like normal. I'm going to try rolling in to zoom in a little bit. I'm trying to locate the heart. And I'm running really laggy because my computer's like, dude, we are broadcasting this and we're using visible body. Okay. I know from my normal life experience that the heart is definitely not on the outside of the body. So I'm going to need to do a little dissecting. Notice down here in the bottom, there's this knife that says dissect. I'm going to click on that. We want to dissect. Okay. I'm going to take away the sternum. Oh, it's so slow. Come on, my friend. There we go. Okay. I am going to take away some of this cartilage. Take away a little bit more. Notice, by the way, as I'm dissecting things, it's making a little note for me what I just cut out. So now I'm going to take away those cartilages. I'm thinking I'm close enough to maybe have an idea of where the heart is. So what I'm going to do is go down here to this anatomy search function right here. When I click on anatomy search, I can now type in the name of what I'm looking for. So in particular, I am looking for the heart, if it will let me type. Man, I'm slow. Has anyone else played with this besides in class here together with my computer dying? We are struggling. Okay, well, I think my internet connection is too poor to support all of this at the same time. But when you are working in visible body, here again is where you would find this window, the anatomy search option. Type in what you're looking for, whether it's the heart, whether it's the lungs, whether we're looking for the small intestine or a particular bone. It will show that structure to you in blue so you know where it is. I apologize. My internet connection says that it is having trouble, so I'm probably a little bit stuck. But again, when we are back here in courseware, I was trying to pull this one up. So click on this, look in your lab packet and say, okay, the ones that I need to find in this picture are the heart, it's the lungs. If you do a search, it will help you to find those. The skeleton should be really easy. The other thing, let me see if I can see how long it takes to load it this time. Okay, I'm loading my whole skeleton. What I would recommend for you, as opposed to doing the anatomy search to find bones, what I would actually recommend doing is just going through on our skeleton and clicking on it. Oh, my friend, here we go. So I clicked on, see how I just clicked on this bone here? Over here on the right, it says that this is the humerus. Perfect. And if I click on this one over here, this is also going to be the humerus for me when it loads. Oh, clicked off. I'm so slow over here. I apologize, guys. So you can go through and click on each of the bones of the skeleton to help you label them in your lab packet. You could also use the anatomy search function down here if you wanted the computer to find it for you. Where's the patella? If I type that in, it'll find it for me and highlight it in blue. So these guided practice activities, mainly the goal is for you to practice going through and dissecting things, taking stuff off that you don't want so that you can see things, or finding the things you're looking for. I am going to see. Okay, I do have just enough bandwidth to turn it. I'll mention for you, say you've got the dissect tool going on. If it'll let me dissect. Okay. Say I accidentally delete this ligament right here. Okay. I took it off and I say, oh my goodness, I actually needed the linea alba. If you look down here, there's a thing that says history. If I click on history, I can actually get it back. So if you accidentally cut away the heart, for example, when you're looking for it, if you go down to history and click undo, you can get that part back. So that's really helpful for you down here in that history area. You can redo something if I want to take it off again. I can undo what I did. I can start it over if I want to. So visible body is something that is going to come most by just practicing it and playing with it. There is a really helpful video as well in Blackboard just underneath where you registered for visible body. So check out that video as well to help you with some of the things like zooming, like rotating. A great video, I believe it's put out by Visible Body to show you how to use visible body. Let me see my chat. Vanessa, right now we're just learning the names of the bones. We will learn bone markings in the second half of the semester. So as long as we know where the bones are located and know their names, that's all we need right now for week number 1. Dennis, we are starting in a trial mode. The question is if we have to buy it. We're starting in the 2-week free trial, and I will be getting back to you by the end of that trial with a code for you. So you don't need to purchase it. We will get that code for you. The school was given a chunk of CARES fund or CARES Act funds, and that's what we're going to use to purchase it for you. So you don't have to pay for this. Let me pull up, since organs was something we were interested in. For my friends who were interested in organs, can you help me out in the chat? Which organs in particular we would like to make sure we find today? Are there any particular organs that gave us trouble while my virtual cadaver loads? Maybe it was more organ systems that we were having some issues with. Well, let's see how much it lets me do. I'm going to try to do a little dissecting here. When I look at what's called the abdominal cavity, that's everything that's under a thing called the diaphragm, a muscle called the diaphragm. On the very outside, there are quite a few layers of connective tissue and adipose tissue. So I'm first going to dissect away this outermost layer that's over top of my organs, if it'll let me. There we go. Okay, so I just got rid of the connective tissue called the peritoneum, not something that you're required to know this semester. I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit to see some of our organs. On the outside of the organs in the abdominal pelvic cavity, we are seeing this little fat pad right here. This fat pad right here is something called the greater omentum. And in A&P2, fingers crossed, when you take it, you'll be on site. We're hoping for you. You'll see this fat pad all the way across the fetal pig and across the rat abdominal pelvic cavity. We don't care about it much in our class. I'm going to dissect it away, but I was just mentioning for you. Oh, my friend. My technology hasn't caught up with the fact that we're back in school, right? Okay, so I dissected that off. I am going to unclick the dissect tool so things don't keep leaving me, because now I would like to just be able to touch them to get their name. So this that I'm seeing right here, this is of the large intestine, something that my students sometimes struggle with. The large intestine, there's less of it than there is the small intestine. There's a whole lot of small intestine down here. It takes up more space, but the tube is really small. So this really small tube here is the small intestine. The large intestine goes across the front and down either side. So I'll show you on our lab models, a picture of our lab models, what that looks like. But remember that even though there's a lot of space taken up by the small intestine, the large intestine is just one tube. It's larger, why it gets its name. Up above the large intestine is the stomach. I'll click on it right here, the stomach. The stomach attaches to the first part of the small intestine. So the stomach goes back behind the large intestine and is going to attach to the small intestine kind of in this area over here. Up above the stomach is the liver. I'm going to highlight the liver. I point out the liver to say that the gallbladder is just underneath it. Let me try to zoom in a little bit. The gallbladder looks green. So if you see, and I'm going to try to dissect for us to see a little bit better, but if you notice underneath the liver, as it zooms very slowly, there's this little tiny green thing right here. This little tiny green thing is the liver, or the gallbladder, excuse me. The job of the gallbladder is to collect extra bile that the liver makes. Bile is something that helps you to eat fat or to digest your fat. So extra stuff to help you digest your fat goes here in that little gallbladder right underneath the liver. Let's see if it'll let me dissect so we can see it a little bit better. There was a question in the chat about the left and the right lung. My question for you, as I very slowly dissect things away, When I look at this person, let me go over here. This side over here on my person I'm dissecting, is this their left side or their right side? What side is my pointer on over here? Is this the left or the right? Yeah, I've got some of us chiming in here. We're absolutely correct. This is the right side. What I always tell my students when you're trying to figure out the difference between the left side and the right side. So on your homework question, where it asks you for the left lung or the right lung, you need to put yourself in your patient's shoes. Yeah, someone said they're right, it looks like our left. Absolutely. Pretend you are that person laying on the table. What they would say is the right side. That is what you say is their right side. So it's not all about you anymore. It's got to be all about your patient. Put yourself in their shoes. Yeah, we definitely don't want to operate on the wrong side, right? It has happened. Not very often, but that is a hospital's worst nightmare, is they operate on the wrong side. So the liver is found on the right side of the body. The stomach is found on the left side of the body. Your left is the patient's right. Your right is the patient's left. I was able to do a little bit of dissecting, so let me zoom in a little bit more, if it'll let me. Just to show you, we can now see that gallbladder a little bit more clearly. See this little green thing right here? That's the gallbladder. Let me turn off my dissect. I'm gonna rotate a little bit if it'll let me. So to the question about what you tried with the left lung, I would say maybe click to dissect on the lung. It might have been the connective tissue on the outside of the lung that was selected. So you might have to get rid of that connective tissue before you can select it as the lung. So maybe give that a try. Yeah, just like a couple of us, like Kira is saying in the chat. It looks like it's not going to rotate on me, which means I'm going to try to dissect unless we are just frozen. I'm looking for an organ that lives underneath the stomach, or right there around the stomach. Did I tell you already what we're looking for? If not, do we know from our reviewing what organ I'm trying to find hiding over here? Yeah, so somebody mentioned the pancreas is actually up a little bit higher. Here's my pancreas. The spleen in particular is what I was going for. So the spleen is nestled on the back side underneath the ribs, just behind the stomach, the spleen back here. Someone mentioned the kidneys. The kidneys are all the way back. So yeah, that'd be the other thing. If your visible body question asks you about the kidneys, you're going to have to get rid of all of the intestines to go back to find them. Let me see if mine will play nice enough for us to find them. I know at least one person in the chat had said the blessing of good internet. My internet is angry right now. I think we are starting to see it right here. So a kidney all the way in the very back, the spleen up a little bit higher next to the stomach. So the big idea with visible body, do take the time to play around with it. Your list of structures that you have to be able to identify on your models, go through and try to identify them here in practice mode. If you find when you're doing the visible body assignment that you can never get a particular organ right, or you can't find something, go back to visible body and do this anatomy search. Have it show you where it is so that you can figure out what you're looking for on that assignment. Yeah, Audrey mentioned trying to go prone. We could try. Let's see if my computer will support that. Flip over the body, see if that's any better. Since visible body is running so slow on my end, I probably won't chill out in here too much more. I'm going to recommend that video again to help you with zooming, with dissecting, with some of those tools. But are there any other last minute questions before I back out of visible body? We'll talk organs on the model since my internet's running so slow. Yeah, so there we can start to kind of see it. Take away a couple vertebrae here. I've got a kidney right here in my view. So there's that kidney from the backside. That might be a little bit easier. All right. Well, my computer is very mad at me for having visible body open, so I'm going to close it for now. If you come up with questions specific to visible body, please feel free to email them to me. I would be happy to play around with finding a solution for you or figuring things out. But again, your best option, let me go back to our course. Your best option before you go and try to get points on these assignments, do play around with this thing right here, the practice. So plan to work on the practice tonight, a little bit tomorrow. If you have questions left, come see me on Friday. Remember, we have student hours on Friday. All right, let me close this down. We talked about wanting to work on the organs or the organ systems of the body. So let me pop up some of the images from our worksheet. Help me out in the chat. I believe, is this from page 2 of the lesson number 1 handout? I think this is a page 2 thing, right? Perfect. Okay, so on page 2, we start labeling organs and we start putting them into their correct organ systems. So when I'm looking at this particular model, okay, so Vanessa asked about the handouts. When you're in the week 1 folder of lab resources, it says lesson number 1, worksheet or handout or something like that. You'll want to print that out to so you can go through and do all of these activities like we're seeing here.
On Blackboard or on Vision? I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So you can either print the lab manual that's in visible body, or that same lab manual or those same worksheets are available in Blackboard as well. So you can find it either place. It might be easiest to go through Blackboard because then you can get the worksheet we're working on this week. So check out that week 1 folder in lab resources, and you should be able to find this at the top of that folder. All right, so when I'm looking at my model here, we have labeled some organs with arrows, and these are the organs that you'll need to be able to identify and also to place in an organ system. I am going to assign some numbers to these organs, and then we're going to work together in the chat to figure out what some of these organs are. One of the organs that I want to start with, organ number 4. What is the name of organ number 4 that we're pointing to here? Can you help me out in the chat? Yeah, so organ number 4 over here, this is a lung, and several of us have correctly mentioned this is the left lung. Remember, what looks like your right side is actually the patient's left side. So put yourself in their shoes. This is their left side of their body. This is the left lung. When we talk about the left lung or the right lung, they're both found in the same organ system. Which organ system are the lungs found in? Both of my lungs, yeah, both of my lungs are part of the respiratory system. Respiratory system. Okay. I also have two other structures on this model that are part of the respiratory system. Can you give me numbers in the chat? There are actually two other things that are part of the respiratory system. Any guesses? Yeah, so lots of us are honing in on organ number 3. Organ number 3 is, in normal person words, is the windpipe. What's my anatomy name for organ number 3? What's the technical name for this one? Part of the respiratory system. Yeah, so the technical name for your windpipe is the trachea. Absolutely. So here's my trachea. When we're trying to remember, because there's two tubes in the throat, right? The esophagus is in the throat and the trachea is in the throat. When you're trying to remember who lives on the front, which is something called anterior, remember that if you're having a really hard time breathing, we can do a procedure called a tracheotomy. A tracheotomy, where we literally cut through the front of your throat to send a tube in so that you can breathe. We don't want the esophagus in front of the trachea if we're cutting up the throat to put a tube into it. So that's how I like to remember that the trachea is in front, because I need to have access to the airway very easily. So the trachea is visible here. I cannot see the esophagus because that's actually behind the trachea. So to use one of our directional terms that we'll talk about in just a bit, the esophagus is actually posterior to the trachea. It's behind the trachea. Okay, so organ number 3, this is the trachea, the windpipe. The trachea takes air to the lungs, the left lung like we have labeled, and the right lung. And several of us noted that organ number 1 is the other organ that is part of the respiratory system. This organ here is actually a muscle. When I talk about this muscle, organ number 1, what's the name of this muscle or of this organ? It is still part of the respiratory system. Yeah, absolutely. Several of us are chiming in the chat. This muscle is called the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is a muscle that lives right underneath the 2 lungs. When the diaphragm contracts, it makes the space up here get larger, so it pulls down. When it relaxes, it pushes the space up. Yeah, so Audrey asked about the diaphragm, if we would consider that respiratory system or muscular system. We can actually consider the diaphragm either of those systems, muscular system or the respiratory system. Let me move that a little bit. So you can learn it as either of them. We will be talking about later in the semester the diaphragm's role in the respiratory system, as in the process of breathing. But technically, yes, like you said, Audrey, we could say it's a muscular system organ as well. It could be either of them. 3 respiratory system organs: diaphragm, trachea, and the lungs. Let's talk about Dr. Ollis's favorite system. So my fun fact for you all, my favorite system is the digestive system. When I talk about the digestive system, there are multiple organs that are part of this system, right? What are some of my numbers for digestive system organs? Digestive system organs. Okay, seeing some votes for 7 and 8. Digestive. I'm putting in all caps because I love it. I do love my digestive system. Okay, 7, 8, seeing lots of 6s. Excellent. Digestive. Perfect. Yeah, and I'm seeing a few of us chiming in as well with organ number 2. That is right. That organ number 2 can also be part of the digestive system. It is one of them too that can be part of more than one system. So we'll come back to that. Let's start over here with 7 and 8. Get my pointer back here. 7 and 8 we actually looked at in visible body. What is the name of organ number 7 here? This one up here, organ number 7, I would call, yeah, so technically its name is the colon. In our class, for the sake of simplicity, right now, you're just going to learn it as the large intestine. When you move to AMP2, you will call it the colon, and you'll name all the parts of the colon. But for now, we're just going to call it the large intestine. Absolutely. Its neighbor down below then, or inferior to the large intestine, what is the name of organ number 8? What's number 8? Yeah, number 8 is the small intestine. Absolutely, the small intestine. So the 2 intestines, remember from our visible body discussion, this one, even though it takes up a lot of space, is the small intestine because it's the little tube. This one, even though it doesn't take up as much space, is a lot wider or a lot larger. This is the large intestine. Now, the reason that Dr. Ollis's favorite system is the digestive system is because when I was in graduate school earning my PhD, I did a lot of research related to all of the types of bacteria that live inside your digestive system. I spent a lot of time focusing on, let's be real here, I studied a lot of poop. I did a lot of DNA sequencing of the bacteria that were found in fecal pellets or little poops from my rodents. So yeah, it was very interesting. Like Kaylin mentioned, I really enjoyed it. But it wasn't, you know, super glamorous when I say that I studied bacteria and poop. But yeah, your digestion process relies a lot on the bacteria that live inside your intestine. But I was studying more than just the bacteria that lived there. I was studying something, here, let me type it for you, something called the gut-brain axis. The gut-brain axis. Has anyone heard of that before? Yeah, so a couple of people have. Yeah, so the gut-brain axis, it's basically the idea if the bacteria that live inside your gut is normal and happy and healthy, your brain functions normal and happy and healthy. But if these guys get messed up because you took an antibiotic or because your diet changed dramatically or because you have an infection, you can actually change the way that your brain works. So that's what I was studying for my PhD, was how changing the gut bacteria can change the behavior. I used a little animal, their names, they were called prairie voles. Prairie voles. So if you want to Google what a prairie vole looks like, they look really cute and cuddly. They're also very wild though, so lots of bloodshed when I had some angry voles, but it was very interesting. So fun fact about Dr. Ollis, my favorite system is the digestive system, not just because food is tasty, but because the gut-brain axis is really cool. So I will now get off of my sidebar and bring us back to reality, right? Several of us have mentioned that number 6 was part of the digestive system as well. What is this organ right here? Organ number 6. Who's this? Make sure to get that one labeled too. Yep, that one is the stomach. The stomach does have some bacteria in it, not nearly as many as other places because the stomach is way too acidic, right? And then organ number 2. What is this large brown organ over here? It's actually the largest organ inside your body. Yeah, that big one over here, organ number 2, is the liver. Technically, we could also say, for any of my friends that are going very technical, the other organ we could say, or other organ system we could say the liver is part of, is the endocrine system. What does the endocrine system do? For those of us who've worked on this worksheet, what does the endocrine system do? Yeah, absolutely. So the endocrine system is all about making hormones. You will learn in AMP2 when you talk about glucose balance in the body that the liver makes some hormones that help the body to know what our level of glucose is in the body. So what I want you to learn for this semester is that the liver is part of the digestive system. Just as a heads up for you, you will also see that it is an endocrine organ too. Yeah, so Audrey was asking with the endocrine system, could we also say that that's the one that kind of regulates body processes? Absolutely. The one that when we talk about the liver regulating body processes, we are talking specifically about things like metabolism or glucose type stuff. Yeah, and Kaylin's absolutely right. When someone sees an endocrinologist, they are seeing somebody about hormones being out of whack. Absolutely. All right, one last organ on this picture for us to label. It's that one I was trying to get to that had a hard time in visible body. Who's organ number 5? What's this one here in the middle here for us? Yeah, absolutely. This is the organ of love, right? The heart up here, shifted a little bit off to the left. So the heart is part of the cardiovascular system. Cardiovascular system. When we talk about the cardiovascular system, cardio means heart, vascular means blood vessels. So the heart and the blood vessels, that's the cardiovascular system. Okay, so Sarah mentioned, yeah, I needed to update my picture here too, that the other thing that the homework asks about, I will circle it for us here in orange, is this one right here. This is the one that we found in visible body back behind the stomach. So this one here that's hiding, that is the spleen, the spleen. And the spleen is a little bit interesting when we're trying to figure out what organ system it's part of. The spleen is part of what we call the lymphatic system. Think of the lymphatic system, a big part of it is the immune system type functions. So it's a combination of the immune system and also, as we're going to talk about in an upcoming lecture class, where we would find something called lymph fluid. So that's a fluid that travels throughout the body. The spleen in particular is really important for blood clotting. Blood clotting. So we store a lot of clotting factors here in the spleen so that when you get a cut, we can send some clotting factors up there. So the lymphatic system, this little spleen hiding back here, we can see it better when we look at this model here. So also toward the bottom of page 2, this right here is also showing you the spleen. So let me put its name in here on this page. This one is, ooh, not how you spell spleen. Try again, Dr. Ollis. There we go. So this over here is the spleen, like we mentioned, part of the lymphatic system. Down below the spleen, what organ am I seeing right here? Who's this? This is one we also tried to find in visible body. Yep, this is one of my kidneys. Hey, again, let's say, is this one left side or right side? Which kidney are we looking at over here? Yeah, this is, again, we're looking at the left kidney, because if we were in the patient's shoes, this would be the left. When we talk about the kidneys, which system are the kidneys part of? Yeah, kidneys are part of what's called the urinary system. The urinary system. They are connected to something called the urinary bladder, which is my last label on that picture. So the urinary bladder down at the very bottom, that is also part of the urinary system down below. One last organ ID for us. Notice that I'm looking at a tube that is behind the one that we labeled before. What did we say the name of the tube in the throat that was on the front side? What's this one called? Even though we're not labeling it, which tube lives on the front? A reminder for us. Yeah, so the front tube, the one that my picture is not labeling, is the trachea. And remember, we need that one to be on the front so that we can put a tube inside of it to get air into your airway. Back behind it then is that organ called the esophagus. The esophagus. And when you look at the esophagus, it actually, you see the pink color in here? The esophagus is made entirely out of muscle, so it looks pink. When we look here at the trachea, notice how there's some blue right here? That's because the trachea has cartilage in it. So another way when you're trying to identify them on the model, if you see the blue, that's cartilage, cartilage found in the trachea. If I see the pink, that's the esophagus because that's made out of muscle tissue. When we talk about the esophagus, what organ system is that part of? What organ system is the esophagus? Exactly. It's my favorite system, right? It's the digestive system. Absolutely. There is actually a little bit of bacteria that even lives in the esophagus. I know this because I did studies from the esophagus through the stomach, through the small intestine and the large intestine. I looked at the bacteria in each of those places. So not a whole lot going on up here in the esophagus. This is mainly to transport food from your mouth down through your throat to your stomach. But we do work on grinding it up or smashing it here in the esophagus. Favorite system, but not with the favorite color. I know, because it's the color I picked last time. So I had to keep similar. So Summer asked about probiotics, since I keep going on about bacteria. In general, probiotics, the idea of them is awesome. The problem is they're not regulated. So the ones you buy at the store may or may not have as many bacteria as they say they do. And they may or may not actually be helpful bacteria. For example, the ones that live in yogurt, the regular yogurt bacteria, they're not gonna chill out inside your body because their job in life is to make yogurt. So some of those ones that ferment yogurt, probably not gonna help a lot. But when we're thinking about buying one over the counter, for example, all the stuff that I read said make sure that you're getting a probiotic that has more than one bacterium in it. So you want it to be a mix, and you want it to have as many bacteria in it as possible because likely a lot of them are dead. So you can ask your micro teacher about probiotics too. I bet that your micro teacher would love to chat about it. All right, before we switch to directional terms, how do we feel about organs and organ systems? Any last minute questions about organs and organ systems? Or give me an emoji. Where are we at? Okay, getting lots of thumbs up. I like it. Okay, so let's see. Let's go here. This is a picture that you have in the guided lesson. So underneath that worksheet, the thing that hopefully you've started to look over to help you with labeling things, you will find this picture there. This picture is outlining for us all of the directional terms that we're learning this semester. When we talk about directional terms, the goal of a directional term is kind of like when you give someone directions to get somewhere. We can use directional terms to help people find a particular organ or a particular bone that they're looking for in the body. So, when I know the location of one organ, I want to describe how that compares to another. That's what I'm doing with directional terms. So let's start with these two right here, anterior and posterior. Anterior and posterior. When I am talking about a structure where one of them is very obviously in the front and one of them is very obviously more toward the back, I can use the terms anterior and posterior. So the best way to learn these things is to do some examples together. So I'm going to talk about the bone that lives right here in the center of your chest. We actually dissected it away in visible body. Does anyone remember the name of it's called your breastbone sometimes? Find it right here. Yeah, so we're talking about the sternum. We're going to pretend this is the sternum. I want to compare the sternum to the bones that make up your spine. What's the name of all those bones that live in the spine? We've got a ton of them from all the way up here, way down here. Yeah, all of these ones here in the back are bones that are called vertebrae. So let me type these out here. Vertebrae are what live in the back. The sternum is what lives front. So I'll draw a little line for my vertebrae and a little line for my sternum. When I'm comparing something found on the front side of the body to something found on the back side of the body, my easiest comparison, front toward back. So with these terms, what I always tell students is to learn them in pairs. These words are opposite. So anterior is opposite of posterior. When I'm writing a sentence to compare structures, I need to make sure I put my structures in the right order. So, for example, if I start with the sternum is blank to the vertebrae, if I was using normal person words, not anatomy words, I would say the sternum is in front of the vertebrae, right? The sternum is toward the front. So if I'm going to turn this into anatomy words, like several of us are saying in the chat, the sternum is anterior to the vertebrae. The sternum is closer to the front side than the vertebrae are. Sometimes, though, we're not going to start by talking about the sternum. Sometimes we're going to start by talking about the vertebrae. So if I start with the vertebrae and I say the vertebrae are blank to the sternum, I would say that the vertebrae are behind or in back of the sternum. So in anatomy words, the vertebrae are posterior to the sternum. Two structures that I compared in two ways. Sternum is anterior to vertebrae, or vertebrae are posterior to sternum. Before I move on, thumbs up, thumbs down. What do we think about this first one, our first example here? How do we feel about anterior and posterior? Okay, lots of thumbs up, perfect. All right, let's talk about our next set of structures. Now we're going to stick with the sternum. Now we're going to compare the sternum to the skull. We're going to compare to the skull now. So let me circle the whole skull. When I talk about comparing the sternum to the skull is up higher than the sternum is, or the sternum is lower than the skull is. When I talk about something that the easiest way to compare its location is something's higher or something's lower, the words I use to describe that are superior or inferior. Superior means I'm up above. Inferior means I'm down below. So help me fill in the blank here. My sentence is, the skull is blank to the sternum. The skull is blank to the sternum. Yeah, the skull is superior to the sternum. It's up above the sternum, which means if I flip it, right, I could say the sternum is inferior to the skull. The sternum is inferior to the skull. So again, if you're comparing two structures, one of them is up higher, one of them is down lower, the words I use to describe that, superior and inferior. If we're describing a structure where somebody lives on the back and somebody lives on the front, anterior and posterior. Let's talk about something that's found in the middle and something that's found on the outside. When I'm comparing something closer to the middle of the body compared to something that's toward the outside of the body, the words I use to compare those are medial and lateral. Medial and lateral. We're still going to stick with the sternum. Let me draw on my sternum here, or general area of my sternum. And we're going to use my bone right out here that I just circled. What is the name of this bone that I see here in the region called the arm? Who lives in the arm? Yeah, a few of us are chiming in. My bone that lives out here is called the humerus. I want to compare the humerus to the sternum. The sternum right in the very middle of the body, the humerus more toward the outside of the body. So when I compare these two, let's do our sentences. The humerus is blank to the sternum. What do we think? The humerus is blank to the sternum. Yeah, absolutely right. The humerus is lateral to the sternum. The humerus is lateral. It's more toward the outside. So if I flip it and go the other way, the sternum is medial to the humerus. The sternum is medial to the humerus. With these sentences, again, I'm going to say this is a great way for you to study, because in this week's lab packet, you have sentences that you're practicing using the directional terms. When you fill in the blank in those sentences, I would recommend to then, either on your paper or at least in your mind, flip those structures backwards like we're doing here. Say the worksheet asked me about the humerus compared to the sternum. Well, then next to it, I would love for you to write the sternum compared to the humerus so that you practice filling in that word. We want to make sure that we're learning these words as opposites of each other, because that's going to be the best way for you to answer these kinds of questions on the homework assignment and when you're taking the lab exam. All right, we have done toward the front and toward the back, anterior and posterior. We've done above and below, superior and inferior. We have done lateral and medial, toward the outside and the inside. Let's talk about what happens when we're talking about two things, two bones, that are found on the same arm or two bones that are found in the same leg. When we talk about comparing structures that are found in either one leg or found in one arm, we have a special set of words that we can only use for those. Underline, highlight, star, or make a note for yourself the words proximal and distal. The only time I can ever use proximal and distal is when I'm talking about two structures that are on the same arm or are on the same leg. And we're going to do examples of both. But again, here's the note we need to write down for ourselves. The only time you use proximal and distal is when we're talking about two things on the same arm or on the same leg. Let's practice this. We're going to start here in the leg. So I'm going to talk about my bone right here and my bones down here in the toes. Let's start with this one. Sorry, that really looks like the finger, doesn't it? Let me move it. Okay, try again. What is the name of the big bone in your thigh? This is your biggest bone in the whole body, actually. This big one right here. Yeah, a few of us have chimed in. The big one in your thigh is called the femur. The femur. Perfect. And when we talk about the little tiny bones in your toes, they have a weird name. Yeah, those little tiny bones in your toes are called the phalanges. The phalanges. For now, we're just going to learn all the phalanges as a group. In the second half of the semester, we're going to learn how each of your feet has like 14 different phalanges. They each have their own name. They're numbered, so they're not quite as scary as it sounds. But for now, we're just going to learn the phalanges as a group. I know somebody mentioned the metatarsals, and you are so close to being right. The metatarsals actually are right here. They're right next door to those phalanges. So the metatarsals very close to those little phalanges right there. So you were super close. Metatarsals right here. All of your ankle bones, because we're learning them this week, all of your ankle bones are called the tarsals. So the tarsal bones right around the ankle, the metatarsal bones here, and those phalanges down here in the toes. I am comparing the femur to the phalanges. When I make these comparisons, the only way that I can compare the femur to the phalanges is how close these bones are to where the limb attaches. So in the case of the leg, the place where the leg attaches to the torso is the hip. When I compare the femur to the phalanges, I am looking at how close these two bones are to the hip. Okay, so I promise this is not a trick question. When I talk about the phalanges, are they closer or farther from the hip compared to the femur? Are my phalanges closer or farther from the hip? Yeah, some of us agree. My phalanges are away, right? I promise, by the way, I promise, by the way, that I'm going to ask you a lot of questions that are really simple. So don't be afraid. If you feel like it's simple, I promise you it is. My phalanges are way farther away from the hip than the femur is, because if you consider the femur is actually touching, or it's part of the hip. So like a friend told me in the chat, when I talk about something that's farther away, the word I use for that is distal. When something is farther away, we are distal. So here's my sentence. The phalanges are distal to the femur. The phalanges are distal to the femur. They're farther away from where this limb attaches to the torso. Yeah, so somebody, Sarah, put a great question in the chat. She said that she got mixed up on what that attachment site word meant. So just think about the two attachment sites that we're always referring to. It's either the hip or it's the shoulder. That's my only two options. Either the hip or the shoulder. I was pointing to his head. Can you tell my coffee hasn't kicked in? Shoulder right here, hip right here. The ankle is part of the limb that is attached to the hip. So always referencing back to the hip and referencing back to the shoulder. So the phalanges are distal to the femur. The femur is closer to the hip than the phalanges are. So what's the word that I would use then if I said the femur is blank to the phalanges? What's the word I use now? The femur is, yeah, absolutely, proximal to the phalanges. Proximal to the phalanges, absolutely. The femur is closer to where we attach, because it's like actually there, compared to the toes. This same thing applies when I go up here to the arm. So we already talked about the humerus that I see right here. Let's talk about the two bones that live here in an area called the forearm. There are actually two bones in your forearm. Let's talk about these. One of those bones lives on the thumb side of your forearm. So when you feel the thumb side of your forearm, you're feeling a bone called the radius. The radius is the bone that's found on the thumb side of your arm. Next to the radius, on the pinky side of your arm, is a bone called the ulna. The ulna. So in your forearm, you actually have two bones, the radius and the ulna. If I want to compare the humerus to the radius, let's see if we can use our words again. The humerus is blank to the radius. The humerus is, yeah, a few of us are chiming in, is proximal. Yep, the humerus is closer to the shoulder. That's my attachment site, right? The humerus is closer to my attachment site than the radius is. Or we could say that the radius is distal to the humerus. This is farther away than the humerus is. So there's a question in the chat, will proximal and distal always be used when referring to where a bone attaches? So I think what your question is getting at is, when I'm comparing two bones on an arm, do I always use these words? And the answer to that is yes. And the way that you know which of those words to use, you're always going to look at either the shoulder, if it's two things that are on the arm, or you're going to look at the hip, if it's two things that are on the leg. So absolutely every time you see two bones that are on an arm or two bones that are on a leg, you only have two options, proximal and distal. Now, here's a special case that I want to mention to you though. Check this out. If I ask you on the assignment to compare, I'm going to circle my ulna. Ulna is the one on the pinky side, my ulna. If we're comparing the ulna to the little bone that lives on the outside of your shin, called the fibula, these two bones live on different limbs. In other words, one of them lives on the arm, one of them lives on the leg. Because they are on different limbs, We don't use this distal and proximal thing anymore. You only use distal and proximal when my things live on the same leg or when they live on the same arm. When I've got one thing on an arm and I've got one thing on a leg, now I can go basic. I can go big picture. When we're talking about comparing arms to legs, which of these sets of words did we use that would make sense that it's a comparison that we would use for arms and legs? Yeah, absolutely. A couple of us are chiming in the chat. The most basic way to compare an arm to a leg is somebody's higher and somebody's lower. So I'm comparing the ulna to the fibula, I'm going to say that the ulna is superior to the fibula. Or if I am comparing the fibula to the ulna, the fibula is inferior to the ulna. So when we're comparing things on different appendages, make sure you only use superior and inferior. These words are special when I'm comparing something on the same limb. Two things on an arm, two things on a leg. Yeah, great question in the chat. If I was comparing the radius to the ulna, absolutely right that the comparison between these two bones, it's just that somebody's closer to the middle and somebody's farther away. So if you were comparing the radius and the ulna, we would absolutely use the words medial versus lateral. By the way, that's a good important point to make too. Notice my friends here, how they look super awkward because their palms are facing forward. This person is standing in what we call anatomical position. Anatomical position. We need to remember anatomical position because it's really important for making these comparisons. So if we were in class together, I would make you all do anatomical position with me. You're lucky that I'm not going to make you do it now. Not make you do it. Encourage you to do it though. When you're in anatomical position, the most awkward thing about it is that the palms of your hands are facing forward. So the palms of your hands face forward. You stand up straight. Your feet are facing forward as well. It's really important that the palms and the feet be facing forward because we have two bones in the forearm. When your palms are facing forward, the radius is always lateral and the ulna is always medial. When my feet are facing forward, the tibia is the big one that's always medial and the fibula is the one that's always lateral. So we've got to be in anatomical position if we're going to figure out things like medial versus lateral. Otherwise, if I've got my arms all slouched and they're crossed over, it's going to be really hard for me to tell who's on the outside and who's on the inside. So when you're comparing things like these bones, when you're comparing these bones, think back to this awkward anatomical position where your palms are facing forward so that you know which bone lives where. One last set of comparison words for us to mention, directional terms, and these are the words superficial and deep. Superficial and deep. We use superficial and deep to describe structures where one is completely inside of or wrapped around by another. The easiest thing for us to think about making these deep and superficial comparisons for is when we compare anything in the body to the skin. So here's a statement for you. The skin is the most superficial structure in the body. Skin is the most superficial structure because what superficial actually means is closer to the outside of the body. If I compare anything to the skin, There is nothing closer to the outside of the body than the skin, because the skin is literally on the outside. So if I want to compare the skin to, remember earlier we looked up the stomach, for example. The stomach has skin that would be in front of it, that would be anterior to it. The stomach has skin that is behind it, that's posterior to it. The stomach has skin that is lateral to it on the outside. If there are multiple directional terms to describe when I'm comparing a structure to each other, there's a pretty good chance that one thing wraps around another. So an example for us would be the skin is superficial to the stomach. Although, to be honest, any organ we could put there, even the stomach that I spelled wrong, right? The skin is superficial to the stomach. The skin is more on the outside. Now, if I want to talk about the stomach compared to the skin, I would put it the opposite direction then. I would say, I'm going to type over his body here, the stomach is deep to the skin. In other words, the stomach is surrounded by the skin. A comparison I often like to make when we're in class together, so think about this when you're learning your bones and your organs. One of my favorite organs to compare superficial and deep is when we think about the relationship between the heart and the ribs. The heart has ribs all the way around it. They're in front of the heart, they're behind the heart, they're on the sides of the heart. The rib cage is that circular group of bones that wraps all the way around the heart and the lungs. So we would say that the heart is deep to the ribs, or we could say that the ribs are superficial to the heart, because I find them all the way around it in all directions. So when do we use superficial and deep? When something is being completely wrapped up in something. If you can find it all the way around, kind of like a glove, you're going to use these terms superficial and deep to compare things to each other. I want to know where we're at. Thumbs up, thumbs down. What questions do we still have? Yeah, so a question about heart versus lungs. Yes, we'll pull a picture and look at that. Yeah, the heart, we would consider the heart would be deep to the ribs. That's correct. Yep, imagine what I would have done in class is put my hand in the middle of the rib cage on our skeleton. We'd say that the heart is deep to those ribs. Let me pull up my picture and we can compare the heart to the lungs, because that's a good comparison to make. Here's my picture here. Heart compared to the lungs. Here's my heart. I have lungs on the left side. I have lungs on the right side. My heart is more in the middle of the body than my lungs are. My lungs are more toward the outsides. I would say the heart is blank to the lungs. The heart is blank to the lungs. Can't spell. Yeah, so the comparison I'm going to make, I'm going to use those words medial and lateral. The heart is medial to the lungs, or the lungs are lateral to the heart. Because I can see the heart from the very front of the body, the lungs don't wrap all the way around it. I just find them mostly, almost exclusively, on the outside or the lateral parts of the heart. A rule of thumb when you're trying to figure out which word to use to compare these structures, what is the most basic way, the comparison that makes the most sense? Because if we got technical, we could probably come up with all kinds of different words to use. There's this saying, right? The saying is KISS. Keep it simple, students. Keep it simple, students. When you look at these directional terms to compare them, keep it simple. The first thing that jumps out to you is probably right. Because usually when students contact me about a homework assignment question, they're overthinking it. They're thinking too hard. So the heart looks like it's more in the middle of the body than those lungs are. Okay, it looks like that. That's my comparison. The brain looks like it's up higher than the heart. Okay, that's my comparison. You don't have to get all technical, get all fancy. The KISS method. Keep it simple. Whatever jumps out at you first, that's probably correct. I see your note, Anthony. We will miss you, but you're good to pop out whenever you need to. Sorry about that, charger. Hey, while we're at it, since I have this picture up, let me draw something really fast. Try to make it thick. I am drawing for you the quadrant system that we can use to give the general location of the organs in the body. Now, when we're talking about the quadrants, here's something that I want to make sure you write down or underline, highlight, star. When I talk about the quadrant system, where I've got left and right and upper and lower, the only place that these quadrants apply to is something called the abdominopelvic cavity. The abdominopelvic cavity. The abdominopelvic cavity, at the very top, it starts, or the dividing line for it of when we get into that cavity, it starts with that organ that we labeled. It's actually a muscle. What was the name of that muscle that we found right under the lungs? What muscle is at the top of the abdominopelvic cavity? Yeah, absolutely. The diaphragm. The diaphragm. Everything that is below the diaphragm. So here they kind of took it out, didn't they? Let me draw my little diaphragm. Everything below the diaphragm we can label or talk about in this quadrant system. Everything above the diaphragm is not part of this quadrant system. So here's the important thing with this. You should never, ever tell me a quadrant for the heart. The heart is not part of any of my quadrants. You should never tell me the quadrant of a lung. The lungs are not found in my quadrants. The quadrants only apply to organs that are inside the abdominopelvic cavity. So it's all these organs that we've been talking about in my favorite system, right? It's all the digestive system organ stuff. So we've got things like the liver, things like the stomach or the pancreas. Everything that's in the abdominopelvic cavity is part of these quadrants. Everything above the diaphragm is not. Question about the arms and the legs, they are not part of the abdominopelvic cavity, so they wouldn't be considered part of the quadrants either. It's just the organs contained within this cavity. And let's remind ourselves, I have two cavities that are upper cavities, that's part of their name, two cavities that are lower. When I point to this one right here, which side of the body is this one again? Which side of the body are we looking at with this one? Yeah, this is the right side. Okay, so this is what I would call my right upper quadrant, I really can't spell, guys, right? Let's try again. Upper quadrant, right upper. Or you might see this abbreviated RUQ, right upper quadrant. So next door neighbors to it then, we've got the left upper quadrant, which you might see LUQ, left upper quadrant. Then we go down below, and it's my LLQ, left lower quadrant, and the right lower quadrant. The reason it's important for us to learn these quadrants is because if you go to the hospital and you say, I have left upper quadrant pain, they're going to treat that different than if you go in and say you've got right upper quadrant pain. There's different organs that live in the left upper quadrant compared to the right upper quadrant. And hey, if you go in complaining about right lower quadrant pain, you could be headed to the ER. Does anyone know what is found in the right lower quadrant that could mean you need surgery right away? Yeah. So what lives down here in the right lower quadrant that we definitely don't want to be angry is the appendix. So the appendix is down here. It attaches at the very beginning of the large intestine. If it gets really inflamed, if it's really swollen, it can actually burst. Yeah, Kaylin's saying hers almost did. Yeah. So if the appendix gets really inflamed, it can burst, and that's really bad news for you. That's an emergency situation. So you go to the ER, you tell them you have right lower quadrant pain, they are automatically going to check your appendix and make sure it's not about to explode. So we would treat that differently than right upper quadrant pain, and we're going to treat that differently than left upper quadrant pain. So make sure we keep our left and our right organized correctly in our mind. Put yourself in your patient's shoes, their left and their right. And make sure this one's easier, right? Upper versus lower. It's just, are you above or are you down below? Any other questions about quadrants or about what we've done with directional terms? So the question is, what cavity would we say the diaphragm's part of? We actually wouldn't say the diaphragm is in a cavity. It's actually a dividing line between them. Yeah, so it's just the boundary. I'm never going to ask you on an assignment or a test which cavity it's found in. I could ask you which cavities it divides, but I'm not going to ask you which one it's actually found in because it's not in a cavity. It's like the wall. Okay, the one last thing I want to do with you all to make sure that we're really good on this directional terms thing, because that's really important that we understand directional terms. I want us to do one last learning activity together. So in just a moment, I'm going to split us into some groups. And what we're going to do with the people in our groups is we're going to brainstorm a list of structures in the body that I could use each of these directional terms to compare to the umbilicus. Now, we haven't talked about the umbilicus, but I'm pretty sure you all can figure out for me, what is the umbilicus? What part of the body are we referring to when we say the umbilicus? Yeah, the umbilicus is my, as I like to say, the fancy anatomy word for the belly button. Absolutely. So what we're going to do with our classmates is we are going to brainstorm a list of structures that are different directions from the umbilicus. So what I mean by this is you're going to come up with some structures that you would say, this is lateral to the umbilicus. Remind me in the chat, what does this word lateral mean? What does lateral mean? Yeah, out toward the side. Absolutely. So here's the good news. This one should be easy, right? Don't tell me anything because we're having a little friendly competition going on here. So we're looking for structures that we list here, things that are away from the middle of the body compared to the belly button. Well, the belly button's in the very middle of the body. So things that are more toward the outside compared to the belly button. Things that are superior to the belly button, meaning they're up above, they're higher than the belly button. Things that are inferior, things that are down below from the belly button. And lastly, things that would be found posterior to the belly button. What does this posterior word mean? Again, posterior. Yeah, more toward the backside, right? Posterior, behind, toward the back. Again, the belly button is on the front side of the body, so there's lots of options here. Things that would be posterior to the belly button. Let me show you the directions, because in a moment when I split you into groups, I will no longer be with you. So when you're in your group, in just a moment, you're going to click down, see this little thing right here? This little box, you can see it next to the chat bubble. Right now, there's nothing there for you to click on. But once you're in your group with your classmates, you'll click on this button. When you're hovering over it, it'll say Share Files. The only file that's going to be in there is today's group work. So when you click on that file and click Share Now, these directions will pop up for you. You will see that chart for you to fill in with your classmates. Now here's where this becomes some friendly competition. On our list here of structures, we're going to, when we come back together as a group, we're going to compare what we put for each of these different structures. If another group put the same thing as you, we kind of cross it off. In other words, we're trying to come up with as many unique options for our list here. If other groups have the same thing as you, neither of you get credit for it. So friendly competition here. We want to get creative. We want to name some structures. So this can be bones, this can be organs, this can be muscles. Any of that stuff goes. Try to be creative so nobody else picks the same thing. So I'm going to split us up into groups. I'm going to give you about 8 minutes so that we have time to come back and compare notes with each other. I'll bounce around a little bit to the groups, but again, remember, when you're split up into your group, click on this little thing, Share Now, and get started. All right, so I'm going to split us into those groups, 8 minutes, and when that time is done, we will come back together and see how we did. Here come those groups.